Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to the Mana Fix and welcome to another video in our Commander Deck Tech series. So one of my favorite creature types in all of Magic is Demon. Demons are really powerful and evil creatures. I love the story behind them and they're just overall really badass. Now one of the most powerful demons is Vilis, Broker of Blood. Vilis costs 3 black and 5 other for an 8/8 legendary demon with flying. He has an ability where we can pay 1 black and pay 2 life to have target creature get -1/-1 until end of turn. He also says whenever you lose life, draw that many cards. So for each time we activate that first ability, we're going to draw 2 cards. This is just incredibly powerful. We're going to draw loads of cards with that ability, and we're also going to be removing our opponent's creatures on top of that. This is like the closest you can get to having a Griselbrand as your commander. Your opponents can't really attack you because whenever they deal damage to you, you're going to draw that many cards. So they're kind of screwed in that sense. Now this ends up playing a little bit like a control deck. So we're going to control the board by activating Vilis' ability to get ahead in card draw and remove our opponent's creatures until we can close the game out. So 8 mana is a lot and Vilis is key to our strategy. So as you can imagine, we're running tons of ramp. Of course, you'll see plenty of the usual suspects here like Soul Ring, Mind Stone, Arcane Signet, and Wayfarer's Bauble. Shout out to Mitch. But there's a few other interesting picks like Jet Medallion for starters. This is going to reduce the cost of all of our black spells, including our commander, by 1 mana. That's going to generate loads of value over the course of a game. So is a card like Cabal Coffers. It's important to note that this is considered a ramp card in this deck, not a land card. That's because it doesn't tap for mana on its own. It needs to be accompanied by several swamps. So I suppose it's a good thing that we run 33 basic swamps in this deck. As I'm sure most of you know, this card is amazing with a battlefield full of swamps. Even if we have just 5 swamps, let's say, we tap 2 of those to activate Cabal Coffer's ability, and now we can create a total of 8 mana. Now you've probably noticed those weren't just normal basic swamps we were using. Those were snow-covered swamps. That's because in this deck we're also running Extraplanar Lens. When this comes into play, we're forced to exile a land we control. If we do though, any lands with the same name as the exiled land tap for an additional mana. So that's why we're running snow-covered swamps instead of normal swamps. Our opponents won't be able to take advantage of this unless they also have snow-covered swamps, and most people don't bother to run them. And this artifact is going to help us ramp up big time. We actually have a few ways to double our mana output in this deck. Cryptghast is amazing. And before you try to tell me I can't run this in a mono black deck because of the extort cost, let me just tell you you're not quite right on that one. The hybrid mana symbol for extort is part of the reminder text. According to the rules, reminder text does not contribute to a card's color identity. Therefore, Cryptghast is actually a mono black card even though it has extort. So now that we got that out of the way, yeah, Cryptghast is fantastic. It makes all of our swamps tap for an additional black mana, and it's only 4 mana for this effect, which is even a better bargain than Mirari's Wake. Nice. Nirkana Revenant has the same ability on a 4/4 creature for 6 mana, but this also has a pump ability built in, so we can make this thing huge if we want to swing in for some damage. Gauntlet of Power is next. This is a 5 mana artifact, and when it comes down, we're going to choose black. So this will give all black creatures +1/+1, and it'll make any land tapping for black tap for an additional black. So yes, this does work for our opponents too, but since we're running only black, we'll benefit from this much more than they will. Caged Sun is a better version of Gauntlet of Power. It has the exact same effects, but it only affects us at the price of 6 mana as opposed to 5. Now we're also running a couple ritual type effects in Dark Ritual and Bubbling Muck. Dark Ritual gives us 3 mana for the price of 1, and Bubbling Muck is essentially a high tide for swamps. This 1 mana sorcery makes all our swamps tap for double for a turn, so that means we'll only need 4 untapped lands to get our commander out. Another card that's going to get us there a lot quicker is Crick, Son of Yawgmoth. This guy is an absolute beast. He basically turns all of the black mana symbols in our casting cost to Phyrexian black mana instead. So we can just pay 2 life for each of those instead of paying mana, turning our life total into a resource. Also, the synergy this has with Vilis is incredible because whenever we choose to pay life to cast something, we're going to draw cards off of Vilis' triggered ability. And then we have a few more of the usual suspects for ramp like Warren Power Stone, Hedron Archive, Thought Vessel, Thran Dynamo. Yeah, we have tons of ramp in this deck. Once we've ramped up, of course, we want to get Vilis out and control the board state with his ability. But on the way there, we need removal spells to make sure we can stall the game long enough, which is where removal comes in. And we're running plenty of it, too. First, we have a few conditional removal spells for creatures in Go for the Throat, Slaughter Pact, and Malicious Affliction. Go for the Throat is a mono-black staple, and there's a good reason for that. It gets rid of almost any creature for 2 mana at instant speed, with the exception of artifact creatures. Most threatening creatures aren't also going to be artifacts, so this will rarely be an issue. And if it is, we can use one of these other 2 spells. Slaughter Pact can be cast for 0 mana at instant speed, with of course the downside of having to pay 3 mana at our next upkeep or losing the game. Still, to have a surprise answer when you're tapped out is very powerful. Malicious Affliction is my favorite of the 3 though. To me, this is almost a strictly better Doomblade in a mono black deck because the 2 black requirement is hardly a drawback if we're only playing black, and it can on occasion destroy 2 creatures instead of just 1 if another creature died this turn. To me, this is almost an auto-include in any mono black deck. Deadly Rollick is another great choice. This card can also be cast for free if we control our commander, it has no limitations for what kind of creature it can target, and it exiles instead of destroying. Defile is another removal spell that's efficient as all hell in this deck. As we said before, we're running 33 swamps, so we'll almost always have tons of swamps on the battlefield. This card takes advantage of that and gives a target creature -1/-1 until end of turn for each swamp we control. This will more often than not have the ability to take out any creature on the battlefield, and it gets around indestructible. Not to mention it costs 1 mana and it's an instant. Nice. Hero's Downfall is another solid staple that can take care of any creature or planeswalker at instant speed for 3 mana. Next, we have a couple cards that could be categorized as counterspells. In black? Yes, in black. I'm referring to Withering Boon and Imp's Mischief. Withering Boon counters a creature spell for 2 mana at the additional cost of paying 3 life. Now, this is something that's going to be totally unexpected from a mono black deck. I love breaking the color pie in this way and taking our opponents by surprise because it can have a pretty substantial effect on the game if we're trading with a costly creature spell or something that can potentially win the game like a Craterhoof. Also, that additional cost of paying 3 life to cast it has synergy with our commander, which is nice. And last up for single target removal is actually an enchantment that has repeatable removal. This one is Font of Agonies. This card has excellent synergy with our commander. Every time we activate Vilis' ability, we're going to put a blood counter on this, and then once we have 4 blood counters, we can remove them to destroy a creature. And this ability doesn't get rid of the enchantment, so it just keeps doing work for us over the course of game. Now we have to talk about the sweepers in this deck too, because those are important in any control deck. The first is the obvious, and that's Damnation. 4 mana sorcery that destroys all creatures. Yep, it gets the job done. Not much more to say about that. But then we have 2 3-mana sweepers that are very similar. Toxic Deluge and Dead of Winter. Toxic Deluge is another obvious staple. For 3 mana and at instant speed, we can pay any amount of life to reduce the power and toughness of all creatures by that amount for a turn. The best part about this is with Vilis on the battlefield, we can pay up to 7 life, and there will be times where that will get rid of every creature on the battlefield except for our commander. And then we're drawing 7 cards on top of that due to Vilis' ability, so that's just incredible value. And then Dead of Winter cares about how many snow permanents we control. This is another snow land payoff and will often have the ability to sweep the board clean. Mutilate is another card that's similar to this but for 1 extra mana. Again, this is another card that takes advantage of the number of swamps we have. This is great on its own but is made even better with Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth. And then last but certainly not least is All is Dust. To me, this card is a must-run in mono black because it's able to get rid of enchantments, something that black is rarely able to do. This 7-mana sorcery gets rid of all colored permanents. It also gets around indestructible because it forces players to sacrifice those permanents rather than destroying them. Now let's talk about card advantage. This deck doesn't run quite as much as other decks because our main card draw engine is our commander. But sometimes it takes a while to get him on the battlefield and we want to have ways to draw cards in the meantime. Night's Whisper and Sign in Blood are 2 cards that pay off instantly. Both of these sorceries are efficient as is because they draw us 2 cards for just 2 mana. They're even better with Vilis on the battlefield because in casting one of these, we'll also be losing 2 life, which means Vilis will draw us 2 additional cards. 4 cards for 2 mana seems pretty good. Dread Presence is another solid card draw engine in this deck. Playing all those swamps is going to pay off with this guy as he's going to draw us a card whenever a swamp enters the battlefield. That, or we can deal 2 damage to something and gain 2 life, which may come in handy for killing off small but problematic creatures, or finishing off a planeswalker or something like that. Again, this guy gets even better with Vilis because that first triggered ability also deals 1 damage to us, so we're actually drawing 2 cards when a swamp enters instead of just 1. Greed is another interesting inclusion. This isn't a card I would normally run, but it is a solid card draw engine on its own. For 4 mana, this is an enchantment that gives us the ability to pay 1 black and 2 life to draw a card. This can be activated as many times as we want in a single turn, so it provides steady card draw, and again, it becomes exponentially better when Vilis is out because paying 2 mana means 2 extra cards with each activation. So that's spicy. Twilight Prophet also fits right into this deck. For 4 mana, this creature draws us an extra card at our upkeep as long as we have the City's Blessing. But what's more is it also deals damage equal to that card's converted mana cost to each of our opponents, and then we gain that much life. So this will help us shift the life totals in our favor, which is important for a deck that's constantly using its life as a resource. We have more ways to gain life in this deck, but we'll touch on that in a little bit. Next up is Necropotence, and oh man, is this card potent. Get it? Okay, sorry. But yeah, this card is amazing in any black deck, obviously, but with this deck, insane. Possibly even overkill. When we pay life with this, we'll immediately draw cards from Vilis, and then of course we'll be drawing the cards we pay life for at our end step. So double the card draw with Vilis out, but of course it's still amazing without him too. And finally, we have Bolas's Citadel. Do we know by now that this card is an absolute powerhouse? Because yeah, this card is an absolute powerhouse. And not just in this deck, but especially in this deck. So this is a 6 mana artifact that allows us to look at the top card of our library. We can play the top card of our library too, and if that card is a spell, we have to pay life equal to its mana cost to cast it, rather than paying mana for it. Wow, so free spells from the top? Well, not free because we're losing life, but at the same time, if Vilis is out, then we're drawing a bunch of cards whenever we cast a spell. So on top of playing cards from our library, we're drawing cards that we can play from our hand too. When this comes down, our opponents will be panicking because believe me when I say this card just wins games. But we're talking about a serious loss of life here, and again, that's why it's important to have ways to get some of that life back. We have a couple artifacts that will just straight up gain us life at our upkeep. Ivory Tower gains us X amount of life at our upkeep, where X is the number of cards in our hand minus 4. Obviously, this deck draws tons of cards, so we'll often have more than 4 cards in our hand. This artifact could be getting us plenty of life over multiple turns. Venser's Journal also gains us life at our upkeep, and the life we gain will be equal to the number of cards in our hand. So again, we should be gaining plenty of life with this. Next, we have a couple equipment cards that can give our commander or another creature lifelink. Shadow Spear gives +1/+1, trample, and lifelink. It also has an ability where we can pay 1 to have our opponent's permanents lose hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. And we don't need to have this equipped to use that ability, so that's an interesting little tidbit. Even without this ability, though, the card would be great, so that's like the icing on top. But equipping this bad boy to Vilis is going to gain us tons of life. It gets us one step closer to that Gristlebrand status. Loxodon Warhammer is even better, though. This also gives trample and lifelink, but it also gives +3/+0. So if we're equipping this to Vilis, it'll make him an 11/8. Not only does that mean more life gain, but it also means that he only needs to deal unblocked damage twice to a single player to take them out of the game. Grey Merchant of Asphodel, or Gary as he's sometimes called, is another great way to gain life and simultaneously drain out our opponent's life totals. Running only black means we should have plenty of black mana symbols on the battlefield to have this deal tons of damage when it enters. Vito, Thorn of the Dusk Rose, is another great card for gaining life. This guy is going to make our opponents lose life whenever we gain life. We can also pay 5 to give creatures we control lifelink until end of turn. So imagine having Vito and Vilis on the battlefield. If we pay for Vito's ability, Vilis will gain lifelink. Then we smack someone for 8 damage, which will gain us 8 life, which then triggers veto, and we have an opponent lose 8 life. So that's 16 total damage and a 24-point swing if we're targeting a single player. So yeah, that's great and may even win us the game on its own, but it'll guarantee the win when we combine this card with the next card, Exquisite Blood. This enchantment says whenever an opponent loses life, we gain that much life. So having both of these cards on the battlefield at the same time is game over for our opponents, as long as we're able to gain life or deal damage to an opponent. So that's one way to win the game, but we have a few others as well. This next win condition will actually gain us life too. When we cast a spell with Aetherflux Reservoir on the battlefield, we're going to gain life equal to the number of spells we've cast that turn. It also has an ability where we can pay 50 life to deal 50 damage to a creature or player. Now often we'll just be playing this to gain a little bit more life every turn, but if we can finish off a game with that second ability, obviously that's great too. We do have to be careful though, because paying 50 life means we'll draw 50 cards if we have our commander out on the battlefield. That sounds great, right? But if we have less than 50 cards in our library, we're going to lose the game doing that. So again, we need to be careful. The next 2 cards are spells that, in the late game, are likely to win the game on the spot if they resolve. Exsanguinate costs 2 black and X generic mana. Each opponent loses X life and you gain life equal to the life lost this way. So again, this is a way to gain life, but it can also just win us the game. With things like the Cabal Coffers Urborg combo and mana doublers on the battlefield, it's possible to cast this for something like, I don't know, X equals 20. If that doesn't win the game, it's certainly going to make it a lot easier to take our opponents out and increase our life total substantially. Even better than this, though, is Torment of Hailfire. If you haven't lost to this card yet, your friends really like and respect you. This card just wins games. It says the same mana cost as Exsanguinate, except it gives our opponents the option to do one of 3 things for each 1 mana we pay into the X cost. They can either lose 3 life, sacrifice an on-land permanent, or discard a card. But again, they have to repeat that process a number of times equal to the amount of mana we paid into X. So if X is 20, do one of those 3 things 20 times. A lot of people will just scoop if this resolves for any substantial amount of mana, so yeah, this card is nasty. So those are the win conditions, but any good deck needs a way to find those win conditions, and black is the best color to do that. We have Demonic Tutor and Grim Tutor, which are just going to straight up search for a card and put it into our hand. Grim Tutor has that loss of 3 life tacked on, so with our commander out, we'll draw a few cards in addition to tutoring. Of course, we're also running Vampiric Tutor in this deck. For 1 mana, we can search up a card and put it on top of our library. Again, we'll draw cards due to the loss of life on this one with our commander out, which actually means the card we search for will end up in our hand. And finally, we have Expedition Map. This card may not seem as powerful as the other tutors, but it's pretty important as it helps us complete our Cabal Coffers Urborg combo, which helps us big time in the mana department. To finish up this deck tech, let's run through a few utility lands we're running in this deck. We already know about Urborg and Cabal Coffers. Another card similar to Cabal Coffers is Cabal Stronghold. This enters untapped and adds a colorless as its normal ability, so it's fine as is. But with its second ability, we can pay 3 and tap it to add a black for each basic swamp we control. So no, it's not nearly as good as Cabal Coffers, but it still can do some work. Castle Lochthwain is nice as it provides backup card draw if we don't have our commander or anything else to get us cards into our hand. If we pay 3 and tap this, we draw a card and then lose life equal to the number of cards in our hand. Now with Vilis out, if we happen to have tons of cards in our hand, this could generate a huge loss of life, which of course means massive card draw. Something to help us get to that point would be Reliquary Tower. We know we're drawing a lot of cards with this deck. That's probably an understatement. Having the ability to hold on to all those cards is better than discarding them in this deck, as having cards in our graveyard doesn't really benefit us with this deck. We want to keep the number of cards in our hand as high as possible, and this land will help us accomplish that. So that's it. What did you guys think of Vilis? Any suggestions on cards to include? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. As always, thanks for getting your fix with me today. Stay safe out there, and peace out, guys.